I caught my son-in-law cheating, in the same SUV I had just paid for in full. I didn't scream when I saw him. I didn't confront him. I didn't even let my expression change. I just sat there in my car across the street, my hands resting calmly on the steering wheel, watching as Jason Carter stepped out of that brand new black SUV, the one I had gifted him barely 2 weeks ago, and walked up the driveway of a house that wasn't his. A house that definitely didn't belong to my daughter, Emily. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look guilty. If anything, he looked comfortable. Familiar. Like this wasn't his first time. The porch light flicked on before he even reached the door, and a woman opened it with a smile that told me everything I needed to know without a single word being spoken. I felt something shift inside me then. Not heartbreak. Not even anger. Just clarity. The kind of quiet, cold clarity that comes when you finally see someone exactly as they are, not as you hoped they would be. 2 weeks earlier, I had stood in a dealership under bright fluorescent lights, signing paperwork for that SUV. $52,000. Paid in full. No financing. No hesitation. I told myself it was for Emily. That a reliable, safe vehicle would make her life easier. Jason had shaken my hand that day, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "I'll take good care of it, Margaret. I promise." I remember smiling back at him. I remember believing him. Now, as I watched him disappear inside another woman's home, I realized something important. He hadn't broken his promise about the car. He had broken something far more valuable. And the worst part? Emily had no idea. That thought lingered longer than anything else. My daughter, who still defended him in every conversation, who still believed her husband was just working late or under pressure. I could have told her right then. I could have taken a photo, knocked on that door, exposed everything in one messy, emotional moment. But I didn't. Because this wasn't just about betrayal. This was about control. And Jason had just made a critical mistake. He forgot whose name was on that title. I started the engine slowly, my movements deliberate, controlled. I didn't need to rush. I didn't need to react. I already knew what I was going to do. And by the time Jason Carter realized what he had lost, it wouldn't just be a car sitting in someone else's driveway. It would be the first piece of a life he thought he could lie his way through, quietly disappearing, one decision at a time. By mid-afternoon, everything was already in motion, even though nothing outwardly seemed different. I went about my day as usual, folding laundry, watering the small garden out back, even taking a short walk around the block, greeting neighbors who had no idea that a quiet shift had already begun beneath the surface of my life. There was something almost surreal about it, how ordinary everything felt while a decision of this magnitude had already been set into place. Around 3 o'clock, I checked my phone, not out of anxiety, but out of timing. The confirmation message had come through earlier, simple and professional, stating that the request had been received and would be handled within the agreed window. No questions asked. No unnecessary details. Just execution. That was exactly what I wanted. Efficiency. Distance. Control. I thought briefly about Jason, about where he might be at that exact moment. Probably at work, or at least somewhere he wanted people to believe he was working. He had grown comfortable with that illusion, comfortable enough to think no one would ever challenge it. I wondered if he would notice the absence immediately, or if it would take him a few seconds to process what he was seeing when he stepped outside and found something missing that he had already come to rely on. Not just transportation, but status, convenience, a symbol of what he thought he had earned. That was the thing about entitlement. It builds quietly, piece by piece, until a person forgets that none of it truly belongs to them. Back at home, I prepared dinner as I normally would, setting the table with the same care I always had, placing utensils in their proper positions, making everything appear unchanged. Emily would be home soon, and she would expect normalcy. She deserved that, at least for now. As I moved through the motions, I found myself recalling small moments I had overlooked before. The way Jason had started leaving earlier in the mornings, claiming traffic had gotten worse. The way he would step outside to take certain phone calls, lowering his voice just enough to avoid being overheard. The subtle shift in how he looked at Emily, not with cruelty, but with a kind of distance that had slowly replaced the warmth that used to be there. It had all been there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for me to connect the pieces. At 6:15, Emily walked through the door, her expression softening the moment she saw me, just as it always did. She set her bag down, asked what I had made for dinner, and began talking about her day without hesitation, trusting the space around her completely. I listened, nodding where it mattered, responding where it felt natural, never once letting my voice betray the weight of what I knew. We sat down together, just the two of us, and for a brief moment, it felt like time had slowed, like we were suspended in a version of reality that had not yet caught up with the truth. Then, at exactly 6:38, my phone vibrated softly against the table. I glanced down at the screen, reading the message in a single, steady breath. It was done. I placed the phone face down beside my plate and took another sip of water, my movements calm, deliberate, unchanged. Across town, somewhere in a driveway that did not belong to him, Jason Carter was about to learn that some things do not disappear by accident. And some lessons do not come with a warning. The moment did not arrive with noise or chaos, but with a quiet kind of disruption that carried far more weight than any argument ever could. Somewhere across town, Jason stepped out of that house expecting the same thing he had left behind earlier, the same sense of control, the same certainty that his two worlds would remain separate and intact. Instead, he was met with absence. A space where something had been. A realization that does not come all at once, but in fragments. First confusion. Then disbelief. Then the slow, sinking understanding that something had been taken back. My phone rang at 6:43. I let it ring twice before picking up, just enough time to establish that I was not waiting by the phone, just enough to keep everything in its proper place. Margaret, Jason's voice came through, tight, controlled, but not nearly as composed as he would have liked. Hey, I think something is wrong. The car is gone. I did not respond immediately. I allowed a small pause, as if I were processing what he had said, even though I already knew every detail of the situation unfolding around him. Gone? I repeated calmly, keeping my tone even. What do you mean gone? There was a shift in his breathing, a hesitation as he chose his next words carefully. It is not in the driveway. I mean, I just stepped out and it is not here. I did not see any signs, no notice, nothing. Do you know if there is some kind of issue with the paperwork or something? He was searching for explanations that kept him in control, explanations that did not force him to confront the truth too quickly. I could almost picture him standing there, phone pressed to his ear, glancing around as if the answer might appear if he looked hard enough. That is strange, I said, my voice steady, almost thoughtful. Are you sure you parked it where you think you did? Another pause. Shorter this time. Less certain. Yes. I am sure. The confidence was fading, replaced by something else. Something closer to unease. I leaned back slightly in my chair, watching Emily across the table as she continued eating, unaware of the conversation unfolding just a few feet away. I kept my voice low, controlled, private. Well, I said after a moment, there is one possibility. He did not interrupt. He was listening now, really listening. When a vehicle is registered under someone else's name, they retain certain rights, I continued, choosing each word with care. Including the right to recover that vehicle if they believe it is being used in a way that does not align with their intentions. Silence. Not the kind filled with confusion, but the kind that comes when a person suddenly understands exactly what is happening and realizes there is nothing they can say to stop it. I did not need to explain. Further. I did not need to accuse him or describe what I had seen. The message was already clear. On the other end of the line, his breathing slowed, then steadied, as if he were trying to regain some sense of footing. Margaret, he said finally, his voice lower now, more cautious, what are you saying? I let another brief pause settle between us, not out of hesitation, but out of intention. I am saying, I replied, my tone calm and unwavering, that some things are not yours to keep once trust has been misused. I ended the call before he could respond, placing the phone gently back on the table. Across from me, Emily looked up briefly, asking if everything was all right. I met her eyes and gave a small, reassuring nod. Everything is fine, I said softly. And for the first time since the night before, that statement felt completely true. Emily finished dinner a few minutes later, still talking about her plans for the weekend, still weaving small hopes into sentences that Jason had already begun to unravel without her knowing. I listened, not to the words themselves, but to the trust behind them, the quiet assumption that everything in her life was exactly where it should be. That was the part one could not rush to break. Not without purpose. Not without making sure that when the truth came, it would not leave her with nothing to stand on. After she cleared her plate and moved to the sink, my phone lit up again on the table. Jason. I let it ring longer this time. Not out of cruelty, but because timing mattered. When I finally answered, his voice had changed. The controlled tone from before was gone, replaced by something more urgent, more exposed. Margaret, we need to talk, he said quickly. This is not right. You cannot just take the car like that. There has to be some kind of misunderstanding. I stood slowly and walked toward the window, looking out into the quiet street as I listened. There is no misunderstanding, I replied, my voice even, almost calm enough to sound indifferent. The vehicle is registered under my name. I made a decision regarding something that belongs to me. There was a sharp exhale on the other end, followed by a pause that felt heavier than anything he had said so far. This is not just about the car, he said, lowering his voice as if that would somehow change the situation. You are overreacting. If something is bothering you, we can talk about it like adults. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was amusing, but because it was predictable. The attempt to shift the ground, to make this about emotion instead of action, to regain control through conversation. I agree, I said quietly. Adults take responsibility for how they use what is given to them. Silence followed. Not confusion this time. Recognition. He was beginning to understand that I was not going to argue with him, not going to give him the opportunity to deny or explain or reshape what had already been seen. Does Emily know? He asked after a moment, his voice tighter now, more careful. That question told me everything. Not concern. Not guilt. Just calculation. I turned slightly, watching Emily through the reflection in the window as she dried her hands and reached for a towel. No, I said. And whether she finds out will depend on what happens next. Another pause. Longer this time. I could almost hear his thoughts moving, trying to find a path forward, trying to understand where the line had been drawn and how far he could still step without crossing it completely. Margaret, he said finally, softer now, measured, whatever you think you saw, I can explain. I closed my eyes briefly, not out of frustration, but out of finality. There was nothing left to explain. You are not explaining anything to me, I replied. And you will not be explaining anything to Emily tonight. I let that settle, then added, if you would like to discuss what happens next, you will come here. You will sit at this table. And you will speak honestly. For once. I ended the call before he could respond, placing the phone down with the same steady hand I had used all evening. Behind me, Emily turned, asking if everything was okay again, her voice softer this time, sensing something she could not quite name. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt that same clarity return, stronger now, more defined. Everything is under control, I said gently. And this time, it was not just a statement. It was a promise. The house felt different after that call, not because anything had changed on the surface, but because something had finally been set in motion that could not be undone. Emily moved around the kitchen quietly, finishing small tasks, unaware that the structure of her life had already begun to shift beneath her feet. I watched her for a moment longer than usual, noticing the small things I had always taken comfort in, the way she hummed softly under her breath, the way she folded a dish towel with careful precision, the way she trusted the world around her without question. That trust was something I intended to protect, but not at the cost of letting it be exploited any longer. Around 7:20, headlights swept across the front window, cutting briefly through the stillness of the room. Emily looked up immediately, her expression brightening with instinctive relief. "That must be Jason," she said, already moving toward the door before I could respond. I remained where I was, standing near the table, my posture relaxed, my expression neutral. The door opened, and Jason stepped inside, his movements slightly more measured than usual, his eyes scanning the room quickly before settling on me. He did not greet me first. He greeted Emily. Of course he did. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, leaned in just enough to maintain the appearance of normalcy, and asked about her day as if nothing had happened. She smiled back, unaware, answering easily, filling the space with a warmth that did not belong to him anymore. Then his eyes shifted to me again, and this time, there was no attempt to hide the tension beneath the surface. "Margaret," he said, his tone careful, controlled, but lacking the confidence it had carried that morning. "Can we talk?" I gestured toward the table without a word, taking my seat slowly, giving him exactly what he had asked for, but on my terms, not his. Emily hesitated, glancing between us, sensing something she could not yet define. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly. I met her eyes briefly and gave a small nod. "Why do not you sit down, Emily?" I said gently. "This concerns you as well." That was the moment everything shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but undeniably. Jason's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something crossing his face before he masked it again. Emily moved to the table slowly, her expression uncertain now, her earlier ease replaced by quiet concern. The three of us sat there, the distance between us measured in inches but feeling much larger. Jason placed his hands on the table, fingers interlaced, as if grounding himself before speaking. "There has been some kind of misunderstanding," he began, his voice steady but deliberate. "About the car. About everything, really." I did not interrupt. I did not challenge him. I simply watched, allowing him to speak, to reveal exactly how he intended to handle the truth now that it had finally reached him. Emily looked between us, confusion growing in her eyes. "What misunderstanding?" she asked, her voice softer now, more cautious. Jason glanced at me again, just for a second, as if trying to measure how much I had already revealed, how far he could still control the narrative. That was his mistake. He still believed this was something he could manage. I folded my hands calmly in front of me and spoke before he could continue. "The car is no longer available to you," I said evenly. "And that decision was made for a reason." The room fell quiet. Not empty, but charged with the kind of silence that comes before something irreversible. Emily's brow furrowed slightly, her attention sharpening. "What do you mean it is not available?" she asked, looking directly at me now. I held her gaze, steady and calm, knowing that this was the moment the truth would begin to surface, not all at once, but enough to change everything. Jason shifted in his seat, his composure tightening, his options narrowing with every passing second. And for the first time since I had known him, he looked like a man who understood that he was no longer in control of what came next. Emily's eyes moved between us, searching for something solid to hold on to, something that would make sense of what she was hearing, but the pieces were not fitting together the way she expected. "What reason?" she asked quietly, her voice steady but thinner now, as if something inside her had already begun to brace for impact. Jason shifted in his chair, leaning forward slightly, trying to regain control of the moment before it slipped further away. "Margaret is overreacting," he said quickly, his tone softening as he turned toward Emily. "There has been some confusion about the paperwork, that is all. We can sort it out." I let that sit for a second, not because I needed time, but because I wanted Emily to hear the way he framed it, the way he reached for the easiest explanation instead of the honest one. Then I spoke, not loudly, not forcefully, just clearly. "There is no confusion," I said. "The paperwork is exactly as it should be. The only thing that has changed is how that vehicle was being used." Jason's jaw tightened, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. Emily looked at him then, really looked at him, as if seeing something she had not noticed before. Used how? She asked, her voice more direct now, less uncertain. This was the moment he had been trying to avoid. I could see it in the way his shoulders stiffened, in the way his eyes flickered briefly toward me before returning to her. He opened his mouth, then paused, choosing his words carefully. Emily, it is not what you think, he said, and even as he spoke, the weakness in that sentence was already clear. I did not interrupt him. I did not need to. The truth has a way of surfacing when people try too hard to control it. Emily's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. The softness in her face began to fade, replaced by something sharper, more focused. I did not say I thought anything, she replied quietly. So why does it sound like you are already defending something? That question hung in the air longer than anything else that had been said. Jason leaned back slightly, exhaling as if the room had suddenly become too small. Look, I have just been under a lot of pressure lately, he said, shifting his approach, trying to redirect, to soften, to dilute. Work has been crazy, and I have been trying to handle everything without bringing stress home. I watched him carefully, noting every shift, every adjustment, every attempt to reshape the narrative into something manageable. It was almost methodical. But it was too late for that. Emily did not respond immediately. She just looked at him, her silence no longer passive, but deliberate. Waiting. Measuring. I reached for the folder beside me and opened it slowly, placing the title document on the table between us. This vehicle was never a gift without conditions, I said calmly. It was an investment in trust. And trust requires responsibility. Jason's eyes dropped briefly to the paper, then lifted again, his expression tightening as the weight of the situation settled more fully into place. Emily glanced down as well, reading just enough to understand what she was looking at before her gaze returned to him. Jason, she said, her voice lower now, more controlled than I had ever heard it, what is she talking about? He hesitated. Just for a second. But sometimes a second is all it takes. That hesitation spoke louder than any explanation he could have given. The room grew quieter, heavier, as the truth moved closer to the surface, no longer something distant or abstract, but something real, something immediate. And for the first time, Jason did not have an answer ready. Jason's silence stretched just long enough to confirm everything Emily needed to understand without a single explicit confession. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone who was not paying close attention, but Emily had always been perceptive in ways he underestimated. Her eyes stayed on him, steady and unwavering, as if she were giving him one final opportunity to step into the truth on his own. Jason, she said again, quieter this time, but firmer, I am not asking twice. He shifted in his chair, his fingers tightening against the edge of the table, his posture no longer composed but contained, like someone trying to hold together a version of himself that was already coming apart. It is not what it looks like, he repeated, but even he seemed to hear how hollow that sounded now. Emily exhaled slowly, leaning back in her chair, not dramatically, not emotionally, but with a kind of controlled distance that spoke louder than anger ever could. Then tell me what it is, she said. He looked at her, then at me, then back again, and in that brief exchange, I saw the exact moment he realized there was no path left that did not require honesty. Not partial truth. Not careful wording. Just truth. And that was the one thing he had avoided from the beginning. I made a mistake, he said finally, his voice lower now, stripped of the confidence he once carried so easily. The words hung in the air, simple, insufficient, but undeniable. Emily did not react right away. She did not raise her voice or push back her chair or demand more details. She just sat there, letting the weight of that sentence settle into place, letting it expand into everything it implied without needing it spelled out. A mistake, she repeated quietly, not as a question, but as a recognition. Then she nodded once, slowly, as if something inside her had reached a conclusion long before this moment arrived. I remained silent, allowing the space to belong to her, because this was no longer my revelation to deliver. This was her reality to face. Jason leaned forward slightly, as if trying to recover something, anything, from what was slipping away. Emily, I was going to tell you, he said quickly, but the urgency in his voice only made it worse. I just needed time to figure things out. She raised a hand gently, not to stop him harshly, but to create a boundary that had not existed before. No, she said softly. You needed time to keep doing it. The precision of that statement left no room for interpretation. Jason stopped speaking. Completely. For the first time since he had walked into the house, he had nothing left to offer that could change the outcome. Emily stood up then, her movements calm, deliberate, her expression no longer uncertain but clear in a way that carried its own kind of strength. She did not look at him again right away. Instead, she turned to me, her eyes searching mine for just a moment, not for answers, but for confirmation. I met her gaze and gave a small, steady nod. That was enough. She turned back to Jason, her posture straight, her voice level. You should go, she said. No anger. No raised tone. Just finality. He hesitated, as if waiting for something more, some emotional reaction he could respond to, but it never came. After a moment, he stood, slower this time, less certain, and walked toward the door without another word. The sound of it closing behind him was quiet, almost ordinary, but the absence it created was anything but. Emily remained standing for a few seconds, her shoulders still, her breathing even, before she finally sat back down. Neither of us spoke immediately. There was no need. The truth had already done its work. After a while, she looked down at the table, then at the document still resting there, and then back at me. You knew, she said, not accusing, not hurt, just acknowledging. Yes, I replied softly. She nodded once more, absorbing that, understanding it in her own time. Then, after a long, quiet moment, she reached for my hand, her grip firm but steady, and said something that told me everything I needed to know about who she had become. Thank you for not letting me stay blind. I squeezed her hand gently, my voice calm, unwavering. You were never blind, I said. You were just trusting someone who did not deserve it. And for the first time since all of this began, there was no uncertainty left in the room. Only clarity. And the quiet strength that comes with it. If you were Margaret, would you have exposed Jason right away in front of his mistress, or would you have handled it quietly like she did? Let's talk below.